Hello and welcome to FinBusiness. We have been carrying out a lot of interesting conversations for the benefit of the financial services sector, and today we have another very interesting personality talking to us on digital transformation. We are talking to Eric Anklesaria. He is with Capgemini, trying to drive the BFSI business of Capgemini in India. Hello, welcome to FinBusiness, Eric.
Thanks a lot, Babu. Thank you very much.
Eric, we have been listening to a whole lot of digital transformation taking place in the financial services sector. In India, again, we have always been far ahead in the curve also, at least the private sector banks. There has been a divide between the private and the public sector banks. Yep. But from whatever that has been happening in the digital transformation curve till today, what is your observation as to how far have we gone? And what is it that is going to come into the digital transformation bandwagon in the next few years to come?
Sure. So, first of all, thanks a lot, Babu, for having me out here. I think just to answer your question, I'll kind of phase my question between two parts, the public sector and the private sector banks, because there's a stark differentiation between both of these segments. From a digital transformation perspective, I think the public sector banks have been a little far behind that game, as their focus has been mainly towards regulatory compliance and risk, considering the larger macroeconomic factors that have been affecting these banks. So, as far as digital is concerned, their main focus has been towards digitization of processes and really not embarking upon digital initiatives, apart from few banks like SBI that we are really seeing in the forefront, getting into a good amount of digital transformation as they progress ahead. But apart from that, most of the other public sector banks have been really focusing on risk compliance, grappling with issues around asset qualities, etc. So, that's been the real focus. Now, coming to the private sector banks, I think most of our leading private sector banks in India have really ridden the wave of digital transformation. According to me, I would say that digital is a different way of doing business. It's not I think only automating business, but it's a completely new paradigm shift when one looks at digital. So, I think the private sector banks have been pretty good in this space. Their entire digital initiatives revolve around customer centricity, which is important, making sure that there is enough of customer empowerment that happens in this space. They've even taken digital initiatives on inward looking areas like human capital, etc., where they've taken humongous amount of digital initiatives internally within the organizations. And also, if one was to really look at the entire journey about APIfication, etc., where it talks about connecting with the corporate world, banks connecting with the corporate world, it's really the wave that these private banks, the top 4 or 5 private banks, have really driven. One could really say that European banks, etc., drove open banking because of regulations. We've seen that private sector banks in India have really adopted that at an early stage, even without having the necessary regulations in place to make sure that there is enough amount of customer empowerment and ability to provide seamless services to customers.
Interesting. So, we have been speaking about a whole lot of developments happening in the customer experience and customer enrichment space, okay, and a whole lot of work has happened there. What next wave is seen? Or you have seen robotics, you have seen artificial intelligence, you have seen machine learning and all that. What next wave is supposed to come into this sector?
I think Babu, just to answer your question correctly, banks have been engaging with a lot of new initiatives on the customer side of it. And as I alluded to it, more of them have been towards empowering customers. When we talk about data driven decisions, when we talk about security, when we talk about ease of doing business, when we talk about speed to market, these have been some areas where digital has played a very pivotal role in these banks. I think talking about really the next wave, as one was to see, is really making your current business processes, both customer facing as well as internal processes, truly digital for each and every product. Today, as much as we would like to believe, even the best of the private sector banks have a lot of processes which are disjointed in some ways or the other. And as a result of which, the holistic customer experience which they really want to drive is missing in some pieces of it. So I think that a lot of banks are really focusing on, those banks which are digitally high on the maturity curve are really focusing on two areas. One is how do they bring in simplification. Second is how do they respond quickly to market changes and demands, and how do they empower the customer to do much more with what he is having. So I think deep customer, data driven insights and customer empowerment is something that's really shaping the future right now.
Interesting. We have been learning a lot about blockchains coming into the market. Much of it is into the POC stage and kind of stuff. We have had few one-off cases of remittances or supply chain or whatever it is as the POC cases in the country today. What kind of ecosystem actually according to you is required to drive this blockchain?
I think, Babu, for any initiative, as we've seen in the past, at least from an India perspective, it's that the financial institutions would need to come together to really drive those revolutionary changes. Today, as you rightly said, that blockchain being a good word, good terminology, is being tried and tested in various POCs. Some bank is trying to do it on KYC, some bank is trying to do it on trade finance, some bank is trying to do it on remittances. So we hear a host of things that are happening in the Indian banking industry as far as blockchain is concerned. But there is no holistic effort to really bring the entire banking framework onto a single platform to be able to realize its benefit. Blockchain can only work and work very effectively if all the banks come together to really do a particular transaction end to end throughout. If it really has to be adopted in a full sense in India, it will really require from the banking regulator or any other kind of a regulatory body to really bring banks onto the common platform for a particular kind of an initiative or transaction for that to be successful. That's something that's critically missing right now. Bits and pieces happening everywhere, but no concentrated effort to really make it like an industry revolution or change.
What are the two next disruptions that you would like to see or you are seeing forthcoming very soon into the industry in the next couple of years to come?
I think from a disruption perspective, and this is something that we are also constantly working on, is about deep customer. As I rightly mentioned to you about how do we engage, improve our engagement with customers and make sure that they're empowered enough. And I think second is that the real ecosystem where banks and fintechs work as partners in the area of simplification. I think a lot of banks are really going in through a lot of architectural changes to simplify the way that they are doing business internally as well as externally to the customers. And I think that's an area where there is huge amount of opportunity coming up really in the space. We've seen some global banks really adopt that, and I think it's sooner or later it's a trend that will come into India also.
With GDPR already into place and IDPR, in its architecture stage right now, what kind of hurdles you foresee and what kind of business opportunities you foresee in the near future for the financial sector?
Okay, so from a business opportunity perspective, companies, technology companies like ourselves, humongous. I think the biggest challenge that we're going to face is the kind of availability and quality of data that we have in India today. We've seen those challenges emerge out when banks moved on to core banking, and still we're seeing these challenges when it comes to regulatory and statutory reporting for a majority of the public sector institutions, which literally constitute 60% of the asset size in India. I think the kind of quality and the quantity of data that one is really dealing with, that's something somebody has to really put a clear thought as to how that's going to affect these regulations coming. And it's pretty simple to get in regulations, but it's pretty difficult to make institutions adhere to that and make sure that we're doing everything that's possible to meet the true spirit in letter and in spirit about these regulations.
So, according to you, how far is it that the banks can actually fall into line with these kind of regulations? How many
It's a distant away. We tried that. If you look at it, Ind AS as a replication of IFRS 9, I think we've seen changes in the dates 3 times. If you recollect that, so there is a lot of readiness that one many times underestimates. With regulations really coming in as to how ready institutions are in terms of systems, in terms of availability of data, in terms of their ability to cope up with these things. So I think from a regulation standpoint, very progressive way of looking at it, but one really needs to have a very deep thought on how ready are we to adopt these things, and what's the realistic time frame in which these things should be made available and ready.
Thank you very much, Eric, for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Babu. Thanks.